You are listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. Sustainable World Radio brings you in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about positive solutions to environmental challenges. Solutions that adhere to the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, fair share. Are you interested in learning more about permaculture projects around the globe? How to plant a food forest? Restorative design or ethnobotany? Then stay tuned for Sustainable World Radio. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier. Our guest today is Javan Bernakevitch. Javan is a regenerative life and land designer, educator, and facilitator. Javan is the principal consultant at All Points Land Design, where he works on small to large-scale landscapes. Javan also works with individuals, providing assistance on how to design your life to work with and not against your nature. Javan founded and operates Permaculture BC, an educational and community hub for permaculture in British Columbia, Canada. You can learn more about Javan and his work at allpointsdesign.ca. Welcome to Sustainable World Radio, Javan. It's really great to be able to chat with you today about life design and how we can live a more purposeful, fulfilling, and impactful life. So I'm really looking forward to learning from you today.
Thanks so much, Jill. It's such a pleasure to talk to you again. I really enjoyed our chat about Spilanthes, as I always do, speaking about things that are close to my heart.
Oh, well, Javan, you really came to this work and instill this life design work with a deep understanding of how to create a life of purpose. And I wanted to let listeners know that you have a really interesting background. And in the past, you had many jobs. You were an environmental educator, which is something that we share. I worked with kids for years, educating about the environment. And you have worked with natural building. You almost became a financial advisor. And so that was interesting. And so I think you also in the past went through some depression as well. And so it sounds like you haven't always known what you wanted and how to design your life. And so I'm just curious, how did your background and kind of your life experiences help you in your life design work?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Yeah, it for me, it started when I was born, and I might have said this in the previous podcast, or maybe not, but I came in with two questions: who am I, and what am I doing here? And those came stock, so to speak. You know, I'm in this place where I want to understand myself. I want to understand my life and what I have to offer, and I have a sense of wanting to offer something to others and to help and to be of service. And so I became very interested about searching and exploring. I looked through a number of different religions. I looked through a number of different organizations and was always really interested in, well, where do I fit? Where can I be of value? Where can I be totally expressed? And it's either William Shakespeare or Pablo Picasso. The jury's out on it. But that said, this idea, our purpose in life is to find our gifts and to give them meaningfully to others. And that's been my rinse and repeat conversation as it comes to my own personal development and what I have to offer to the world, and has really helped a lot of clients in that we aren't one thing. We're not a monoculture. We're not one aspect or one attribute or one thought we have or one behavior. We are the multitude. We have lots to offer. There's parts of us that are creatives and artists. There's parts of us that are doers. There are parts of us that are altruistic. There are parts of us that are highly selfish and even narcissistic. And what I found with life design and cultivation, it's about holding a center space, really listening to all those parts and to getting a sense of what's coming up over and over again. What are the rhymes? What are the things that rhyme consistently in my life? What are the melodies in my life? And that's been really fulfilling to use that type of approach, because I come back to, I love these types of conversations. I could be a guest about life design on a podcast every single week and be very, very happy, because I love talking about this. Mm-hmm. it really deeply fulfills me. So much for me of my background has been really coming back to what I used to call wellspring. Like what's the well? What's the artisanal well within me that continually springs forth? Or as I talk about it now, essence. What's that piece of essence that I have that just doesn't matter what I'm talking about, doesn't matter who I'm with, it always comes back up. And one of the funny ways in the 21st century you can figure this out is, what are you constantly searching?
Mm.
What are you constantly reading about? What do you have an infinite amount of time for? And those are some of the first discerning questions I use with folks who, and I have a lot of folks who come with a number of issues or problems they want solved, but the folks that want the who am I and what am I doing here and how can I give myself meaningfully to this life? That's some of the first questions. What are you constantly looking at? What is coming up for you? What do you have 150 browser tabs open on? What podcast do you listen? Things like that.
And I think you also talk about this, and we'll be getting more into more the nitty gritty of this in a bit, but of perennial passions, right? Like, what are the things that really you find yourself through the years thinking about? And like, what is it that breaks your heart over and over again? Like at
Mm.
3 a.m., if you worry about things, some people find themselves up at night worrying. And it's like, what is the one issue or two issues that you really find yourself over and over? And I think that's a valuable tool as well.
Yeah, I think for people who are on the more reactive side of the scale, that can be a great question. It's funny though, I've worked with clients who are not very reactive. They know they want to do something, but their body doesn't produce that worry. And so they're almost this, salt flat sort of visualization where they're like, I just don't know. And like,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll ask questions like that. Well, what's going on for you and what's worrisome? And they're like, I don't really worry about much. I just don't know. And that can be physiological, that can be pathological, that can be some aspect on the biological system, and is normally something like that, in which case I refer them to a number of folks who are good at toxicology. And they usually either spin totally up and they're fine, or they come back years later. But those are great questions, I think, for folks that are, they like to perseverate. They like to, think over and over, like, wow, I keep thinking about this. And on the other side, for folks that have been wounded deeply, as we all have in some way, shape, or form, as kids, those wounds can be the crucible of the gift that they have to make in the world. This is true even of us biologically. If we have a wound, we will guard against it and we'll build muscle around the other side of it. So we've literally built a skill that nobody else has. And I think that's where my work going through my own depression and still being very on guard about it, because it's like a sprained ankle. Once you've been as chronically depressed as I was, it's easy to get back into it. And as I was just talking with my husband last night, we've had a plague of locust in the garden where and heat wave, right? We're in the cool tropics in Canada. We get deep winter. We get minus 20 Celsius and we get a foot and a half of snow. And normally we get temperatures between about 20 and 35 Celsius. But we just had a heat wave of 50-degree plus. Our thermometer only goes to 50 C, which I think is 120 or 122 Fahrenheit, something like that.
Jeez. Oh my gosh.
And so I came back because I was visiting friends for a couple of days, and it just happened to be over the heat wave. And I was like, I think we'll be okay. Like, set up the irrigation, make sure everything's right. Come back. The plants have crisped, the berries have boiled on the bushes, and because of a dry spring and the way dry springs work, the grasshopper larvae aren't introduced to a fungi that usually wipes out a good portion of their population. And then basically these solitary critters, these grasshoppers, at some point get a spike of serotonin, and instead of being solitary, they become gregarious, they get longer wingspan, and then they turn to locust. And
Oh,
I
wow.
come back to my garden and 70% is eaten. The currants leaves have all been eaten. The
Oh,
haskap leaves are being eaten. The peas, the beans, the beets. I just
oh
planted
my
beets.
gosh.
So, and all the strawberries. Just planted 450 strawberries and they're all gone.
What a loss.
Yeah, it's a loss, and it's also an opportunity to, in all things, to be present to the feelings that are inside of us, to go, okay, what's inside, like what's alive right now? And for me, I was really on guard because of the depression. I was like, okay, wait a second, I can drop really quickly here. So What am I learning? What's available to me right now? What am I pushing anything down? Because depression, in my experience, is literally depressing feelings you don't want to feel. And so I took a little walk, screamed and yelled at the locust, got out my diatomaceous earth, blessed them with a number of expletives as well as the diatomaceous earth, and thought, okay, what can I learn from this? What can I bring from this? Why is this a good situation? And this is one of the tools I teach within the toolbox of tools of sovereignty for clients is we have to actively start to train our response. We are incubated in a culture that says react to everything, have a big reaction, have a big feeling. And yet, most of the sages of antiquity and history say to be careful of your reactions and to be very observant of what's going on and not to attach to those reactions. And so, one of the first tools I teach clients is to respond to everything that is emotionally reactive with interesting. Somebody just told you, you just changed your life. Oh, that's interesting. Locust just ate 70% of your garden. Interesting. Um, you just won the lottery. Interesting. You were just given an amazing, beautiful, incredible gift by a colleague. Interesting. But to take that first moment to go interesting and then to allow the feeling to be experienced through that lens of interesting instead of saying, oh, this is the best thing ever. Oh, I want more of this. Oh, now I'm attached to this feeling. Oh, give me, give me, give me. This training process of starting with interesting helps us to create some distance between us and the emotional reactions that we have been steeped in and have been genetically reared to have and have lots of good reasons for having them. But then we graduate to fascinating. And I'm a Star Trek fan, so the next level of this is the eyebrow raise as Spock had and fascinating. And it has a little bit of curiosity to it. And what I find with
Mm-hmm.
fascinating, which is my go-to these days, is that it's impossible to be angry and curious at the same time. I've been trying ever since I was told this many years ago, and it's very, very difficult. So if I stoke the flames of curiosity,
Hmm.
then I build capacity to move past my reaction. And anger, this is a good point to say it. Anger is a secondary emotion. It's not a primary emotion. Anger is a response to a primary emotion of fear, of frustration, of anxiety, of loss, of disappointment. It's the feeling of the feeling. And that's what's so interesting to me about anger
Mm-hmm.
is that it is a secondary emotion, and to be very cautious about that because behind anger, it's kind of like I don't know if you ever watched Scooby Doo when you were
Mm-hmm.
young.
Oh, I loved it.
Right. And it was always the like, who's behind the mask?
Mm-hmm.
Every single week, it was always somebody masquerading as somebody else. And it's very much the same. There's always another emotion masquerading behind anger. And this opportunity of saying interesting, fascinating, and then climaxing to good and great gives us the opportunity to interact with this opportunity of a new piece of feedback.
Then you're a master of your reaction because I feel like so much of my, I can speak for myself, life force energy is frittered away in that anxiety and tension and stress. And so I think that's really important when you can stop a moment and then think, okay, how can I be curious about this instead of just reacting? But it would take training and skill, I would think, right? Or I guess repetition and practice.
Yeah, more and more I think of what I do in my work is to train folks in a couple of tools, a couple of processes, and it's like going to the gym. You have to go consistently, you have to practice consistently, or nothing will change.
One thing that you said in our previous conversation, in our other episode, and that doing the research about you, I read repeatedly was that you say if we don't design our lives, someone else will or probably already has. So, Javan, if you could share with us what the signs are of an undesigned life, like how can you tell? How can you tell if you haven't designed your life?
That's a great question. I've never been asked that question, and I'm really excited to answer it because I think it'll have a lot of value. Kudos, Jill. Kudos. Um, so, symptoms of an undesigned life are aspects of your life are choosing you instead of you choosing them. And this came predominantly from my work with folks who have addictions and had gone through a number of conventional ways of working with addiction, and they wanted to see if my work had any value. And I'm very upfront with people. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a therapist, not a doctor. I don't play one on the internet. I'm a guy who's made it through quite a bit and has some tools that work really well. And as a client of mine once said, it's kind of like you're a Sherpa. You help us decide where to go. You take some of our baggage. You help us chart a course. You help us learn how to get there. You help us acclimatize when we're there. And when we're there, you give us back our baggage and you say, I'd probably get rid of this, this, and this, and this is how I would do it. And if you want to, I can help you. And when that person in particular came to me, a couple of the things they were saying that made them think that their life was not being designed by them was that it was being chosen for them. So they were going through the motions of their life, but not feeling like they had any control over what was happening. They were having a lot of experiences with substances or processes, because we can be just as addicted to process as we can with substance. We can be very addicted to doing things in a certain way because it gives us a sense of safety, or parts of us a sense of safety. Problems with decision making, problems saying no, not really understanding why you do the things you do, or how the makeup, the wiring, or the plumbing of you was created, and you are a bit of a servant to your mind. There's an old saying that the mind is an incredible ally or incredible servant, but a terrible master. And if we come to our lives from any one aspect of our persona, or of our body, our mind, our spirit, chances are we're going to miss out on other aspects in our life. So that can be a really big indicator. Spinning the gears, feeling stuck in place, feeling stalled or stagnated, feeling a malaise or just a lack of initiative can be another piece there. And then the other one is really wanting to give the best of themselves to others. I just got a inquiry for a good fit call, which is where all of my potential clients start off with. And he'd come out and he says, I just want to be the best dad and the best husband I can. And I know I have work to do, which I thought was an incredibly responsible attitude and perspective. So those could be some of them.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So you've worked with the land on large and small scale land design work. And then I'm just curious, what you basically are doing, Javan, is, along with all of your other teachings and life experience, is teaching people how to design their life by working with and not against their nature, which I just
Mm-hmm.
love, because to me, that's the whole gist of permaculture, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so can you tell us what would be an example of that?
Yeah. So there's this conversation that's going on right now of radical integrity, radical authenticity, radical honesty. This idea of constantly searching for your quote unquote authentic self. So if you take a look at a landscape,
Mm-hmm.
and if the landscape is expressing itself that there's been a recent disturbance, and there's lots of thistle, there's lots of quote unquote invasives or pioneers, that is still an inherently authentic landscape. Similarly, we are authentic in every single moment. Every single moment is an authentic expression of the parts and the aspects of us, and how we're bringing them to the forefront. What we usually do is we usually have parts of us that think we should be a certain way. We should be smarter. We should be faster. We should be this. We should be that. And they balk at the idea that we're having the feelings we're having. Well, just like when a little child comes up and says, this is really a problem for me. If we don't listen to that child, if we don't allow that child to express what's going on for them, that can become internalized as long-term trauma. When we work with our nature instead of against our nature, we accept ourselves for all of who we are. We start to create an awareness and an acknowledgement, and we start to compassionately interact with the parts of us that are the way that they are, the parts of us that love podcasting, the parts of us that feel frustrated when a podcast doesn't happen the way we want, the parts of us that want to rail against whatever it is that created the locust in my garden that have eaten 70% of my crop.
Uh,
We have those parts of us, and we are then able to go, wait a second, that's a part of me that played a role someplace in my life because it's a part of me. So it's obviously done some good for me at some point. How do I want to interact with this part, this feeling, this emotion, this behavior today? Just as a composer or a conductor or a soup maker will make a beautiful symphony, will conduct an orchestra, or will make an incredible soup, we have to be careful about the ingredients that go into it. So I may have an entire array of spices and flavors that I can bring to any situation. But if I'm always reaching for the Father knows best part of me that is very strong and can come out at any time, um, it's even a turn off to me and to parts of me these days, because I'm not there to know best. I'm there to listen deeply and to be compassionate. And when I see other people bring that out and say, well, this is just who I am, you can see the box they put themselves into, right? They're saying, oh, this is all I have to offer. And yet we know, because we've lived our lives, that there's so much to us. And so when we work with somebody's nature instead of against it, one, we don't deny anything that's happening. If we're feeling frustrated, if we're feeling angry, if we're feeling that person, that such and such, that so and so, we're not going to deny that. We're just going to take a step and say, oh, interesting, a part of me feels, a part of me thinks, a part of me is behaving. Or if that's too much for some folks, because it was for me, having born and raised in Alberta, which I think we joked about last time is kind of the one night stand product of Texas and Montana. Very skeptical, bigger, better buck, lone rugged woodsman, like, I don't know about this new age woo woo. And that's a big part of me and was a large portion of my personality years ago. But as I realize now, if that idea of a part of me is too much, I can just say, oh, I have a feeling of inside of me. And what this does is it disidentifies but acknowledges the feeling or behavior. And this is huge. This is like any child who feels unacknowledged or unseen or unheard can create issues down the line. This is the case of attachment theory. This is the case of the psychology of selves. This is the case of most psychology and psychotherapy, is that we have young ones inside of us that used to be living young ones, used to be us at 6 and 4 and 10, 12, who weren't acknowledged, who weren't able to process the feelings they were having. And so they started to create ways of being that are now outdated. The ways that I respond to my husband or my bonus daughters when the kitchen isn't clean is not the response that I would love to have on a daily basis. And so by working with my nature and going, interesting, I've got this feeling coming up. How do I in this moment want to respond? That becomes the moment, the genesis point of true creation and true sovereignty, because now I choose.
Right. You have choice. And this really reminds me so much of the permaculture principle of observation. It's getting into that place where it's like, okay, I'm not going to jump in and do this right away. I'm going to observe a bit. And it gives us that choice. I love that. And it's a good practice. It's hard to do sometimes in the moment. And so one part of your work too, Javan, that I really thought was key is that you stress that knowing our values is really vital to living a good life. And some of us know our values, and some of us, I was talking to a friend about this, and she said, well, I know a few of my values, but what's the way to get clear on this? Like, what are the most important values that I have? And then how to live a life that reflects our values. I think that's a big challenge for many people.
Yeah, for sure. And was for me for a number of years, just being able and feeling like I could live my values. And really, I think when I talk to people, and we have our good fit call, and I get a better sense of who they are and what's important to them. They say this all the time. I want to live my values. I want my values to shine through my activities, and I want to pass those on to my children, or I want to share that with my community. And this was normally taken up in the way that we were structured in our tribes and in our societies before we started to become hyper individualistic, which has its roots in capitalism and has its roots in a number of previous social and anthropological changes and revolutions. But as we come today, and if anybody's out there thinking, well, how do I figure out my values? One of the things to do is to play the game of the remarkable life. So if you put yourself 10, 20, 30 years in the future, whatever feels monumental to you, whatever time period, and it could be 1 year, could be 5 year, Again, remember that everything I say today is completely tailored to you. Life's 100% negotiable. And we just have to remember that, so that way we can take whatever is being given to us and go, okay, I'll take the best, I'll leave the rest, and I'll add something uniquely my own. And this is not mine. This is Bruce Lee's approach to life. And I think that's why he did so phenomenally well, going from Wing Chun and then starting to develop his many sourced martial arts system. But when you look into the future, you go, great, I go to bed tonight, I have the most comfortable, the deepest, the most beautiful sleep. I wake up tomorrow and it's 10, 20, 30 years in the future. Where am I? What am I waking up as a feeling or a thought? Who's around me? What do I go and do? What are my surroundings about? What do they look like? What do they feel like? What do they smell like? What is my work that day? What do I apply myself to? What is my vocation? Have I come to my calling? Am I doing the same thing? Am I doing it with the same people? Am I doing it with other people? This is the first step I work with when I start working with values-based decision making, and it gives us a narrative and a story. And from that, we start to pull out values. What's important to a person? If somebody says, I wake up in a place that's cozy and warm and safe, it's like, oh, interesting. Do you have a value of sanctuary? And the moment you say sanctuary, somebody goes, yeah, or somebody goes, yeah, but it's home. I like home is always close at hand. That was a value somebody recently said during a session. And so as we pull out all these values, we get a sense of, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. And arguably, this is the most important part, the words don't matter. It's the feeling behind the words that matter. I worked with a young woman in Australia recently, and she came to me with a saying, and it was, or a value, it was, my body is a temple. I said, interesting, why are you bringing this to me? Obviously, you've thought of this, and if it was good, you'd be fine with it. She goes, I don't know, there's something about the word temple. And I said, okay, well, what does temple mean to you? And she goes, well, honoring, respecting, holding in high regard, tending. I said, great. What do you not like about temple? Well, temple means religion and authority and control. And I said, okay, so what if I honor, respect, and pay homage to my body? And the smile and the tear in her eye gave me the sense that that's what she's seeking. She's seeking to have that be true for herself. Now, if this young woman decides every single day that this is the truth, and she won't allow any decision to go past, be it what somebody says to her, be it how she operates on a day-to-day basis, be it what she permits herself to do, then by the end of the day, that statement will be more true than it was yesterday. And this is basically the rinse and repeat process. If anybody's listening and goes, oh my God, that sounds like a lot of work. It is. You're right. Building muscle is a lot of work, and good things come with work. But I found that this work of holding myself to the values I want my future self to hold, and then doing favors for my future self by ensuring those things come true, helps immeasurably. What I found with values is that as I start to put them to the test, when the rubber meets the road, when I start to actively make decisions by and through them, I then refine them. This is the coolest thing about this way of working, is that it is the only tool that self-hones as you use it. A knife gets dull, a pick gets dull, but as I use these values to make decisions, and I come back to myself, I go, well, that made sense when I wrote it, or that made sense last year. But this year, what I really want is X. And I'll give you an example. So twice a year, I check in with my values. I do it in December, and I host a workshop now internationally for folks to connect with it. And then I do it around my birthday, which is coming up. I tried doing it on solstice, but it seemed too weird. I've been doing it on my birthday for too long. And unfortunately, if I'm going to offer 2 workshops a year, it should be in June, but because I'm not doing it, I just don't care enough.
No, you're standing up for your value of doing it on your well, that's not really a value, your choice.
No, it is. No,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. That was the point I was about to make, is that these days I don't do anything unless I love it. I just don't. And yeah, I don't make as much money, but man, my life satisfaction is through the roof. When people say they want a successful life, it's really interesting, because success is usually gauged externally. You're gauging it against somebody else. You're saying, oh, I'm as successful as. Whereas if you want to live a satisfied life, a life of satisfaction, you're usually reaching internally. And what's so fascinating about our culture is when you ask people that question, what is a satisfied or what is a satisfying life to you? They usually don't know because they've never internally looked inwardly. They're so interested in the external, they're so interested in reacting that they've never taken a moment to look inwardly, especially on this continent. There's other continents that are definitely further along. I tend to get a lot of people who are in the same conundrum I was years ago of really not listening to myself, and that's largely that's what this is of listening to oneself is to understanding one's values and to really put it out there and say, okay, well, if this is going to be true today, what do I have to do differently? I just got an email from a farmer I'm working with right now on values-based decision making where we clarify what are the values you want to be true for yourself. And then we use those values to filter any decision that comes your way. And this is really useful for people who have a hard time saying no, for people who feel like others direct the direction of their lives, either through the stories, narratives, or norms of their institutions, their ancestors, their immediate family, or folks generally who have just a tough time making decisions, period. They're just, there's just always so many options and I'm always spinning my wheels. And I can just never get down to a real decision. And so this client who I've been working with, amazing farmer down in the southern states, they had a great quality of life statement, a daily statement of purpose. And this is a great way to start this process is to pick your current weakest link, whatever the thing is that is just the most frustrating. If it's finance, if it's quality time for yourself, if it's self-care, if it's home, if it's friends, if it's an expression of what's alive in you in essence, just to pick whatever that major weak link is and to give it a positive statement. So theirs was they felt squeezed all the time. All their work, they always felt squeezed. And so we just worked with, I feel less squeezed. Really simple, really easy. But that became their daily statement of purpose. And that becomes the lock screen of your phone, the lock screen of your computer, the active wallpaper for both. It becomes a little card that you put in your pocket, you pull
Mm.
out and you look at, and you go, I'm less squeezed. Okay, if this is going to be true today, what do I have to do? And this is why it's not an affirmation. You're not saying it over and over and over and over again. It's just, okay, I want this to be true today. What do I have to do? And sometimes it's taking a breath. Sometimes it's not scheduling something extra. What I found with my daily statements of purpose is that when I'm using them, I actively change my day. So when I came back from my mini vacation to a decimated garden and heat wave, destroyed irrigation controller and all the things that happened, I was like, okay, I feel overwhelmed. My weakest link right now is feeling like I'm a failure. I teach this. This is my livelihood. I help clients with this. And I've come back to a garden that's been decimated. And a part of me feels like I should have known better. I should have an answer for everything. So I was like, okay, so what's the weak link? The weak link right now is getting down on myself. Okay, cool. So I celebrate what I've been able to succeed at. This was sort of the formative first iteration and kind of wordy and kind of cumbersome. And then it transformed into I celebrate. And then it got transformed into I love my life. And so what I've been doing now over the last couple of days is I've been waking up. I'm like, okay, I love my life. What's going on right now in my head? And all those voices come up the moment I wake up, like, ooh, look what you didn't do. Look, like, it's like, well, if I love my life, what do I have to do? Well, I have to acknowledge those voices because if I don't, they get louder. So I acknowledge those voices. Okay, what else do I have to do? I'm really sore right now. I don't want to be sore. Okay, I'm going to go stretch. Great. I want to love my life today. What else do I need to do? Well, I've got a lot of clients I need to make sure that I've gotten back to because I took some time off. Okay, well, I'll go do that. So all throughout the day, this guides me. This becomes my North Star. At the end of the day, I check in. I'm like, great. Did I love my life more today? And was it of value? So
Mm.
it's one thing to have an experiment, but then we have to come back and we actually have to test it out. Like we have to check in. Did it work? And sure enough, I'm like, yeah, I did a really good job today. I got out, I did everything I could in the garden. I was feeling kind of run down, a little tired. I wasn't ready for a nap. So I gave myself some time to play some video games, which is something that resets my brain really nicely. And so spent about 30 minutes doing that. Came back out, picked a bunch of St. John's wort, picked a bunch of mint, put those in the dry, in my outside drying rack. Checked in with the husband, do you need anything? How can I help you out? What do you need today? the whole day was guided by this idea of how do I love my life
Mm.
a little bit more. And now as I'm moving out of that and moving out of that biggest weak link, my biggest weak link now is I'm very behind with a number of folks because not only have I had this heat wave and this locust infestation, but now I have a couple of wildfires that are very close to my
I know.
house.
I wondered about that. Ugh.
So it's like, okay, I need to put some of these people later in my schedule. I was going to get back to them. I was going to develop a program for them or take them on as clients. It's like, okay, I need to put them in the end of August. And basically, I'm making space. So that way I can come back to the clients I already have, come back to the people who I've already agreed to work with and say, great, where are we at? What do we need to do? How can I move this forward? And then how can I still have space for myself and all of life that's happening? And I'll finish this little section with years ago I brought in a aquaponics educator to teach a course, and she said something remarkable that I've kept in my mind and have made an active value in my life, which is we always run the system at 80% because it's a closed system and life will always be there and we'll always have these ebbs and flows. Or as one of my favorite quotes from Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, life will find a way. And so that has been an active value in my life. And originally it was, I'm at 90% capacity and then 80 and then 70. And now it's 60. Now I aim to, if I have 100 working hours a week, I aim to have 60 of them booked.
Mm.
If I have 100 hours of leisure, I aim to have 60 of them booked. I aim to be at 60% capacity and then to allow the rest of that time for the swing, the ebbs, the flows, the locust, so to speak. And what happened is I wasn't paying attention to that value over the summer, and I was taking on more and more and more because I was really enjoying it and I was keeping up with everything and everything was good. But I'd forgotten that there's always going to be ebbs and flows because we live in a dynamic ecological system. And so this was a wonderful reminder. This is why this was good. This was a wonderful reminder that, okay, 60% is 60%. And if you take on new projects and new book projects and new this projects and that projects, it doesn't matter. You still have to be at 60%. You still need rest time. You still need downtime. You still need time with family. You still need time to play with the dog. You still need time to harvest medicine and wildcraft and forage Saskatoons. And especially now, seeing as the garden's basically toast.
Aw,
So all of
literally.
that, yeah.
Aw.
So yeah, that's really important to keep in mind when you're working with and developing capacity with values.
And I love that. And that really, I think that's the kindness and compassion when we can give that to ourselves. That's so important. And that also really illustrates well something that I got from listening to some of your webinars and also reading about your work was that you were stating that modern culture really emphasizes goals over quality of life. And
Mm.
that you, Javan, you stress quality of life over goals, which I really just love that idea because I feel like it's so often, like you're saying, it's like, yes, I want to do this, 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 and this. And then at the end of the day, it's like I am exhausted and my quality of life isn't great, but I'm accomplishing these goals. So I really love the idea of using your values as a template and then following those values. And then your quality of life, I could see how it would really improve.
Mm. Yeah, that was a major revelation years ago where I had so many clients that were working on land and they were getting excited by the next thing they saw online. They were having a severe case, an acute case of shiny thinginitis, where they were like, "Oh, hugelculture," or "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
this plow," or "Oh, this chicken setup," and instead of going, "Well, what do we want our values to be around this landscape?" and then verifying if the thing would bring about this state of being, they were just running on the, oh, that looks good, that looks good, that looks good. And that's the opposite of the always putting out fires. It's the same reactive behavior, but it's, in the quote unquote positive or novel. And the byproduct of that, the result of that is that you have a lot of unfinished projects. You have things that never get finished or never get done, and you're always on to the new thing. So you're digging 100-foot hole, but you're digging 100 holes a foot deep instead of digging one hole 100 feet deep.
My God,
And
my life is filled with holes. I'm a human gopher. It's horror.
Hmm.
I'm gaining insight right now. I've got to fill them in. I've got to
Well,
trap that part of myself and then be nice to it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's part of it is just saying, yeah, there was a part of me for a long time that thought, okay, quantity over quality is better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our society,
Yeah.
it's be involved in the many, don't be involved in the few.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I love that you immediately went to compassion, and that's so important to have compassion for the parts of you that were that way and were in that situation, or even in the moment, like acknowledging, oh, that's what that part was doing. And to listen to also the other parts that are going, Javan, you idiot, I can't believe you did that, and go, oh, interesting, why does this part of me feel this way, even compassionate to that part, so that way all parts get this sense. This is one of the tools I use this tool of voice dialogue created by two psychotherapists, Hal and Sidger Stone. And it's such an incredible tool because as a facilitator, it's my job to hold the space and to model that I'm holding all of your parts equally well. The part that hates what you're doing, the part that loves what you're doing, the part that wants to be bigger than Jeff Bezos, the one that wants to be the smallest little hole so that way nobody ever can see it. To hold all of them equally well so that way you can hold them equally well. And then when you come back to this place of center, can go, how interesting. I have all these parts that are doing these things, and right, when I'm in this state of mind, it's this part that's really talking, or when I'm feeling this way, it's really this part. Oh, I can actually hold myself in a center space, hear this cacophony, this British Parliament. Robin Williams once
Mm-hmm.
called British Parliament Congress with a 2-drink minimum,
Yeah.
this raucous cacophony, and go, oh yeah, I acknowledge the honorable member from You're an Idiotopia, and I want to acknowledge the other member of you're acting too big, you're going to get squashed. And in the center, I can go, that's really interesting. All these parts feel this way. And yet I'm going to hold center and choose and chart a path that none of these parts could see because they're so myopic. They only see what they see. They can't see anything else. And it's kind of like a little kid. Again, it goes back to this little kid. It's like, can we do that tomorrow? No. But it'll take so long. Life never, they have issues with concepts of time. They have
Mm-hmm.
issues with right now. Dr. Gabor Mate, one of my mentors, has this wonderful approach, and he says, we're all born narcissists.
Mm.
Me, I, now. And my experience of anthropology and history teaches me that most societies had a rite of passage. It was usually a fatalistic rite of passage, or it was a psychedelic rite of passage that brought somebody to the cusp of death where they had to take full responsibility for themselves. They had to say, I am my own person. And one of the reasons why these rites were fatalistic for these tribes was they would rather a dead tribe member than an uninitiated tribe member,
Mm.
than a child, because that child, they couldn't afford to have another child who had reached maturity because they needed a worthwhile adult in the tribe to survive. Now, think about our lives. We don't do that. We encourage people to be youth longer in Canada, and this may or may not be the case anymore, but years ago, when I was applying for a program, youth was considered to 35 years of age.
Wow.
You go back 100 years ago, 14, 15, and 16-year-olds were leaving home and charting their course in the world. So now we have all of this to contend with as well, plus the fact that we really are, we're a bunch of children and narcissists walking around in adults' bodies. And it's not my responsibility to correct you or anybody else unless somebody says, hey, I want some help. But it is my responsibility to take full responsibility for myself, for all of myself, for all the parts and the feelings and the behaviors. And then to say, how can I evolve from that knowledge? How can I better myself? How can I be less reactive? How can I be of more value to my community? How can I know and share my gifts with a greater zeal and greater connectivity, and not burn out every 3 months because I'm doing, I think it was like 47 projects when I realized how much I was working.
Yes, it's true. And I think many of us don't even know that we have a center point that
Mm.
we can work from, because I so identified in my 20s with that child part, and the kind of critic part and those parts. And I feel like that's a breakthrough for many people when it's like, wait a minute, this is just a part of me. There's
Mm-hmm.
another part of me that I can gain wisdom from and that can be compassionate toward these other parts. So this conversation is really interesting, and I have like a million other questions, but we're getting we're getting close to the end of our time together, and it's just been really fascinating. One question I have, Javan, is
Yes.
that okay, as you said, your vegetables, many of them are toast.
Hmm.
We're in climate chaos, fires, record temperatures, flooding, drought. As we face all of these challenges and longstanding issues, as well as we know, the list goes on: social justice, poverty, all of these challenges that we face. Each one is very serious. Is it selfish? Do you believe it's a selfish endeavor to design your life? And shouldn't we be focused on these bigger issues that we face?
Great question. A number of the ecological designers and landscape designers that I work with come to me because they're burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
They come because they've given too much to their business. They've lost track of their family. They've lost track of themselves, and they've completely burnt out. And they think if they just have a better system, they'll be okay. But the problem is they haven't put their health as a priority. They haven't put themselves as a priority. And what's so interesting about that is that comes from a cultural belief of it's somewhere down the line. They were taught they needed to give of themselves. They needed to please everybody in the world to be of value, or some iteration of that approach. It looks very different in each person. The snowflake is a little different, but it's still a snowflake every single time. And what's interesting about that is these folks have stopped being of value because they've made it about what they should give.
Mm.
And the neat thing about altruism is very selfish. People are altruistic because of the feeling it gives them. They're altruistic because of how they want to be perceived in the world or what they want to do. All our behaviors are internally motivated. And so what I found is that when I engage in life design or life cultivation, and others do as well, they become very clear on what they can do. They become very clear on what's over their boundaries in terms of time and experience. They become very clear on what their gifts and their skills are. So instead of consistently trying to be a turtle and yet they have wings, they stop trying to do that. And they're like, oh, wait a second, this is actually how I can give my gifts meaningfully to others. And they do it so unapologetically. So they are an engineer teaching permaculture, and they say, no, I'm unapologetically an engineer. They are somebody who feels deeply and they're super empathetic, and they go, I really should get out of programming because it's just killing my soul. And in that, we go, great. Once we know our skills and our process, how can we give that meaningfully to the problems that we actively want to help solve? And this means that I get to take a step back from trying to change anybody's mind, because I got to tell you, it's super it's super frustrating, and it's really Sisyphusian. Uh,
Exactly.
so much of what I do is not about changing people's minds. It's not about telling people that they should be taking the ecological destruction that's happening on our planet seriously, or they should be taking action. I've been on the receiving end of I call it my shoulder shitty committee that shoulds all over me. And I don't believe that has much value. Every once in a while there's outrage, to be sure, and that's important to allow to be expressed and created. But at the same time, we need people who have a maturity about them and take responsibility. And what I find is that when people engage in life design and cultivation, they become more responsible individuals, and they end up doing more because all of a sudden they're thinking, well, what are my tools and how can they work at the highest level of my person, instead of, oh, I have to go and do the thing that I was told to do. So I find that when people connect with their essence, I find when they connect with what's up for them, what's bothering them, they become the best possible expression of what they're currently wanting to be and the values they're wanting to hold. And then they become very active in whatever way they can. And then the other thing that I think is really important, and this is a tool of sovereignty that I've curated out of Byron Katie's work, is really to understand what is my business, your business, and nature and God's business.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some things that I can influence. I have this sphere of influence, which is what it's called when you're into the tech sphere, but it really is, this is my business. This is what I can control. And I like to think about it in sort of a medieval Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, walled city. And this is Javantopia. This is Javanville. This is what I have control over. My reactions are in there. My health is in there largely. But every once in a while, when I step out the gates and I start to dictate what should be happening in your business,
Oh my
I
gosh.
suffer, but only 100% of the time. So it's not that much. And that becomes, again, an indicator of when I'm not designing my life is when I'm trying to tell you what to do. I've stepped out of my own garden and said, well, maybe you should think about this and think about that. There's a growing awareness right now that personal effects and personal actions we have to be taking. And at the same time, to not become so delusioned that you think that it is everything that you do. And if you don't recycle that one thing, the world's going to end.
Oh my gosh.
And this is
Yes.
where I was at years ago. I thought that was it. I had to hold myself to such a high standard that I was living at an eco village, and I bought flowers for my partner at the time. And I was like, oh my God, they're going to judge me. I have to hide these. Yeah, basically when we suffer, it's usually when we step out of our business and we start to control others. We start to say other people's business is our business. And basically what we're doing is we're arguing with reality. The reality is that their business is not our business. It never is, never will be. The nature and God's aspect there, the locust that decided to take over my garden, nature and God's business. Nothing to do with me. I didn't keep it as a dry spring. I didn't make sure that there wasn't enough water to drown out the larvae of the grasshoppers. I wasn't part of the 250 years of warming our planet up until the last 40. So I've got a part in that for sure, but it's not completely me. And this is where when we don't allow people to grow up, when we don't allow people to take responsibility for themselves, people tend to take responsibility for others and to be frustrated on other people's behalf and offended on other people's behalf. It has a lot of secondary and tertiary issues. But largely what it does is it means that you never get to be in control of your life. You're always outsourcing your sense of satisfaction. You're always outsourcing your sense of validation. And this is where when we are constantly stepping outside of our business into other people's business, we're outsourcing our life. We're saying, no, you tell me when I'm good. No, you tell me when I've done a good job. No, you give me validation and celebrate me instead of celebrating ourselves. One of the most simplest things I do with clients is get them to start celebrating their wins. Because what we celebrate persists. So recently, I've been working with this gentleman for quite some time in his late 50s, and he started to celebrate things that have gone well. And you know what? There's more things that go well because he celebrates it, and all the parts of him go, oh, okay, yeah, so that's what that looks like, and that's what that feels like. When we do this work, when we have these opportunities to take full responsibility and to be totally inside of our business, we completely and fundamentally change the game of life.
Mm-hmm. And one thing too that I wonder about is life design a privilege? Say that someone is just responding to life and working at a job that they have to work constantly to support their family. Is that something that is it a just a, something that people with money and with resources and time can do?
You know, my favorite thing about this work is that I have given this work to, well, now because it's on the internet, to anybody who's interested. And in the past 10 years, I've talked to people about this in person in Kenya, Uganda, Cuba, places where I work, where arguably there is not a huge amount of material to be accessed. There's not a lot of social mobility. People who are born to a place usually stay in that place for the rest of their lives. And what I find is that whenever I talk about this, I say, listen, this may not be for you. This may not be something that you feel you're comfortable exploring. I'm more than happy to talk about it, but if you don't want me to, that's fine. It's always a yes. And my favorite stories are the ones, especially in Cuba, where it's a pretty tough situation, right? If you get a government job, you get paid 20 CUC. Everyone has to be working in the black market in some way, shape, or form. So you actively always have to be doing it. It's part of the culture. It's very hard to get your basic needs. Pardon me. It's very hard to get what you think is the standard of living from everybody met. You always get your basic needs met through the government store, if they have what you want, if they have the supplies. Pardon me. And both in Cuba and now I'm thinking of this young man in Uganda. We're like, you're right. Life is negotiable. If I consistently think it's one way, if I consistently think this is all there is to it, that's all I'll see. Yes, there may be some issues and there may be some injustice and there may be some frustrations, to be sure. But if that's all I focus on, that's all I'll see. There's this thing in skydiving I learned when I was practicing and really curious about learning it, called object fixation. Same thing in motorcycling, actually. And the number one killer of skydivers is skydivers, because as they're being radioed down and being told, don't aim at the barn, they hear barn and they focus on the barn.
Oh, wow.
And object fixation kills you. Object fixation kills dreams. Object fixation kills inspiration and motivation. Yeah, the level that we can design or cultivate, yeah, we'll have a level of advantage wherever you're born and whatever situation you're born into. There may be some advantages there, to be sure. But can anybody look at life and go, yeah, there are aspects of this that I can control from my perspective? For sure. Can I negotiate as much as I can to my extent? For sure. There's lots of things I can't negotiate with. We're all under some level of control. We're all born into some level of human farming. That's been happening since the advent of agriculture and is happening at even an accelerated rate today. My experience is that the principles, the practices, the concepts, they apply to anybody. How far you can go applies to how much you apply it and how much you think you can move, and also how much you believe you can change. That doesn't mean that, in my native Canada, there aren't some old growth forests that are actively being destroyed by interests after the First Nations who owned that land said no. That doesn't mean that doesn't happen. It doesn't mean that the residential schools in my native Canada that have been shown to have mass graves of young Indigenous people who were taken from their homes. That doesn't mean that doesn't exist. And it doesn't mean that the government may or may not take responsibility for that, or the Catholic Church, more importantly, take responsibility for that. That doesn't mean that may or may not happen. It just means that I get to be in further sovereign control of myself as I come to those conversations and as I decide, how do I want to contribute to that story, or do I? Is it by supporting people at Fairy Creek Blockade? Is it by supporting the First Nations I know around their experience of residential schools? Is it about providing a platform or giving them access to the people I know to tell their story? Is it about bringing them on the podcasts I have? What does that look like, and what can I actively do, as opposed to throwing my arms up in the air and saying, well, I can't do anything, which is, again, super narcissistic. It's like, how dare we not say that we have agency and power? Again, that's an outsourcing of control. It's like, well, I can't do anything, so I won't bother. Yeah, that's like being a kid. That's like being a little kid and taking zero responsibility.
I just want to keep talking to you, but there's so much. I mean, but I'm wondering if there's anything that we did not discuss that you think is very pertinent to this discussion.
Yeah, there's probably two things. And the first one is that we start with life design and then we move into life cultivation. So it's like any good garden. You start with the design and then life responds and goes, yeah, you read some of the book right and some of the book you got wrong. Sepp Holzer, a mentor of mine, has this wonderful saying, the book of nature is always open to being read and always open to being reread when you go and make a mistake. And so it's really important that people understand that portions of this are designed, like, okay, I'm going to think about this and be a little bit of strategic. And then as life comes at you, now it's cultivation. Now it's like, oh, interesting. That shoot produced fruit, but that shoot withered and died. But that shoot's in the sun and it's getting all of the wind, and it looks like there's a vector for disease there. Okay, well, that kind of makes sense. So maybe I don't grow that there. Maybe I grow that over there. So that cultivation aspect, that observation aspect, the acknowledgement aspect, the humbleness aspect, well, I want this tree to do this thing I want it to do, but it's not doing it. Well, there's a couple other parties that are playing here, and just because the human brain thinks it's the best and the brightest and all the rest of it doesn't mean it is. And that idea of humility, that idea of cultivation is really important. So as I've come to this realization over the last year, a lot of my ad copy and a lot of my written word is changing now to include life design and cultivation, because that's really it. I see these two spheres that I live in, the life design and the land design and the cultivation of both, to be analogous. They're one and the same. To live well in this world is to live well in relationship to the land that is our life support system. And to live well internally is to be able to live well externally. For the folks that are living moment to moment, day to day, dollar to dollar, and steal, lie, cheat in whatever way they can to feed their families, they're not even eligible to enter into this conversation that we have such the advantage to.
Mm-hmm.
So part of me going back to that question you asked
Mm-hmm.
previously is it's a responsibility to take on as much sovereignty as possible, to actively be champions in our own life so that way we can be of value to others. It's so important to do so, because there are some people, in the way that their countries have been developed or their countries have been colonized or have been exploited, that don't have this option. They don't have the ability to engage in even this podcast, because they don't have the resources, they don't have the access to the internet. Yeah, by 35, we're supposed to have 50% of the world on the internet. But there's always going to be a bottom tier of humanity that, for the reasons that they're there, are not out of a place of poverty, severe poverty that can be inaccessibility. So part of the reason I do what I do is because I can.
Mm-hmm.
I can have a bigger effect. I can have a bigger experience. I can offer my design services to First Nations at a fraction of the rate that I do to everybody else. I can offer initial sessions to people for free with voice dialogue, because I've got my basics taken care of. Do I have yachts? Do I have second homes? No. Do I need them? No. I don't need those things. Those things are not of value to me. Those things are a whole number of reasons and status pieces that just don't add to my quality of life. And I've tested them. This is the great thing about values-based decision making. I'm like, should I get a second home? And every time it's like, are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
This is what I love about values-based decision making, is it's a sober second thought. It's like, it's almost like when we're in emotional reactivity, we're drunk and we're trying to make decisions. And it's like, don't pick up your phone and text your ex. Don't do it. That's bad call. But when you have this sober second thought that's just asking you questions like, does this decision get to the root cause of your problem? So I'm working with a client right now who's got 75 acres, and we're practicing decisions. And so one of the decisions is, should we run another hydrant out to the goat pen versus leaving it where it is and just running a hose? Simple decision, not very costly, good decision to test when you're learning. It's training wheel decision, right? So you look at that and you go, okay, well, if we run a hose is $60. So that's a $60 conversation. If we run a hydrant, it's probably $250. What's the value of having a hydrant closer to the goat pen? So we go through all of the value. What is it going to improve the social, economic, or ecological aspect there? Well, if we want more animals, having a dedicated hydrant would be really important. So we get into all the little pieces, and it's so amazing because there's so many facets to these decisions. And the other thing that's really important to note and that people can take away is to make sure that every decision that's tested is assumed to be wrong, or is assumed to be not a good fit. And this is great because this immediately inoculates us against our own personal and our societal biases. So if we come up with a decision, this is a good one. I was working with a colleague of mine who's a land designer, and the decision that he was testing was, should I get a drone for aerial photography? And the root cause, and this is true for most of us,
Mm-hmm.
the root cause he put was, I don't have a drone. And I was like, mate, we got to have a conversation here. Why do you want the drone? Well, I want a drone because I want to take aerial photography. Great. You live in a province that has perfect aerial photography and has LiDAR data that would take you 4 times the cost to produce. Why do you want a drone? I want a drone because I want a drone. Yes, fair enough. So what problem does the drone solve? A want, not a need.
Mm.
It solves, I want a drone because it's cool and I want it. I want a toy that I can fly. Cool, that's fine. But let's
Mm-hmm.
be honest that it actually doesn't solve a work problem. It solves a want, which, notice I didn't even say problem, because wants are just wants. So at the end of it, it was like, okay, I don't need a drone, but I should probably increase the photographic capacity of my phone. And so I may want to upgrade or switch ecosystems or providers or whatever. Great. And he went out and he ended up contracting a couple of drone flights. That was like a couple $100. And now he doesn't have a drone that depreciates in its value. Now he doesn't have a drone he has to keep up. And in Canada, now he doesn't have to have a drone that he has to have a pilot's license for, which is about $1,500 to $2,500 to get.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why values-based decision making is so important on a land base or a life base, because it inoculates you against decisions that would take you away from your quality of life, take you away from your values.
Yeah, and that was one question that I really wanted to bring up, and I'm so glad you brought this up, was really the importance of making good decisions and that we can learn to do this through a process because that really stresses me out. Even
Mm.
little tiny decisions. So this was really I'm glad you brought it up. That was a point when I read that when you said making decisions can be a positive thing. I was like, "Oh my God, Javan, are you kidding me?" Ah,
Well, decisions are destiny. They
yeah.
make what we do. So if I get up in the morning and decide to stretch my body, because I know I'm going to be in the office for 4 hours, I know I've got like an hour to 2 hour with you. I know I've got a call with my insurance adjuster. I know I've got a bunch of Oregon State University permaculture design students I have to mark. I know I've got 2 or 3 designs I have to work on. If I don't stretch in the morning, what's my body going to be at night? So that decision of I want to love my life is like, yeah, I want to love my life, and so I'm going to have painful irps and moans escape my body as I contort myself in what should be pretty standard ranges of motion. And so by the end of the day, I look back and I once put it this way: it's like life design could be simply explained as do less of what you didn't like yesterday and what was harmful yesterday and do more of what was beneficial today.
Oh, I love
That
that.
that that could be the simplest way of doing it. It's just like, let's do a scan of yesterday. And this is what I do when I do these yearly reviews. It's like, let's do a scan of the last 12 months. What was amazing? What was stupendous? What was incredible? And when I did this in 2020, December 2020, I realized that doing these online courses with some incredible individuals was so much fun that I created an entire educational learning platform called Regenerative Living, skills to help you live on the planet as if you intend to stay. No ideology, no dogma, just here's a skill about living soils. Here's a skill about food preservation and growing and understanding how much food it takes for your family to survive in a year. Here's a course about hedgerows from the foremost hedgerow designer in the West Coast. Here's low impact development. Here's biochar. Here's just a bunch of little tiny skills that you can pick up and work with, because as I look back on 2020, it was one of my favorite things, is working with these amazing instructors and offering education. So I just did more of it in 2021. And that's the rinse and repeat process. If somebody's listening to this and was like, wow, I was invigorated by this conversation, it's like, great. Dive into more of this conversation with me or with others. There's lots of great speakers and thinkers that are talking about life cultivation and design. When we double down on what's good for us, we get 3 or 4 times the effort that comes out of it, produces 8, 10 times. It's an exponential equation. It's not linear. Because when we go back to the essence, we go back into Wellsprung, we say, okay, what's my message? Who am I? What's my essence? Can I be compassionate to it? Can I learn compassion? Can I make decisions based upon my values? Can I be really invested in myself so I can be invested in others? it's like coming out of the stratosphere with your rocket boosters on. It's just incredible how many good things happen when all those things are firing at once.
Mm. If people want to learn with or from you, they can find you at allpointsdesign.ca. And yeah, this has just been so helpful and thought provoking. And I love this discussion, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge today.
Oh, you're so welcome, Jill. I love talking about it, and you ask such great questions. And it's such a pleasure to explore this with somebody else and invite and introduce new people to the concepts. And again, if folks are interested, indeed, allpointsdesign.ca/life will take you directly to the life design work.
Thank you so much, Javan. This has been wonderful.
Such a pleasure, Jill. Thank you for all you do in the world.
You've been listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. You can find us online at sustainableworldradio.com and also on iTunes. For more information about permaculture and ecology, visit the Sustainable World Media YouTube channel, where you'll find videos about permaculture, aquaponics, organic gardening, rainwater harvesting, and much, much more. Sustainable World Radio is a listener-supported program. If you like what we do, please consider making a donation to the show. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier, and thank you so much for listening.